Hi, everybody. My name is John Palumbo from Crossroads Church, and I lead a ministry called Freedom Ministry. And I want to thank you for continuing to tune into this series, Future Glory. We're going to be in part four today, which I titled 1990, What Have You Done for Me Lately? And in today's part, I'm going to talk about basically a series of events that happened between 1990 to 1993. Now, just to give a little recap, in 1988, through a friend, my mother met a widower by the name of Michael. Michael had three sons. He was a very nice guy. He wanted to marry my mother. He was a longshoreman, and he's the one who got me my job working on the Jersey piers, which I worked for a short period of time. But the problem that I had with Michael was not so much a problem with him himself. The problem was that I had become very guarded. I was convinced that when my mother was with this guy, John, who basically raised me from the age of 9 to 19, that he would be a part of my life forever. I wrote my father off when I was 12 years old with the assumption that I had John in my life now. John would become my father, my stepfather. He was the one that raised me. He was the one that was making sure that I wasn't cutting out of school or when I was whatever I may have been doing, keeping me in check. He was the person that I began to respect as a father figure. And then they broke up. And I was always in the back of my mind thinking, how long is this relationship going to last? Because I was convinced that nothing lasts. People come and go in my life like it's a revolving door. So why would I allow myself now to get close to this guy, knowing that he may be here today and gone tomorrow also? So I became very guarded, and it affected relationships that I had when it came to dating. I wanted no part of having a serious girlfriend, getting close to anyone. I kept everybody at arm's length. I wanted to keep everything in a situation where I can control the situation, where I can guard myself from getting hurt. I did not realize it at the time, but I was becoming very codependent. Okay, and I was starting to have control issues and issues that coincide with codependency. Now, when I worked on the Jersey piers, it was shape work. There was times when I was the low man on the totem pole. There was times when I might have worked one ship all week, and it might have been an 8-hour ship, it might have been a 4-hour ship, it might have been a 12-hour ship. But then there was times when I might have made 3, 4, 5 days a week, and I would make good money with overtime and whatnot. But the problem was I was only 21 years old at the time. I was 20 going on 21. And I really didn't want to be so committed to a job. I wanted to hang out in the schoolyard. I wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to go bar hopping. I wanted to just enjoy life. I wanted a job that was a little bit more, I guess you could say 9 to 5, although I was not a 9 to 5 white collar type of guy. I never was. I was always a blue collar type of guy. But because of that, not knowing when I was working, not knowing when I was coming home, not knowing how to, plan my social life, I ended up quitting the job and I got a job at a small plumbing shop in Marine Park as a plumber's apprentice. And I didn't know nothing about plumbing at the time. And obviously, the money that I was making was nowhere near the money that I was making working on the piers. But I did know that I was going to work Monday to Friday. I knew I was going to have my weekends off. In the wintertime, we used to install boilers. So in the wintertime, we were busy. I'd make some overtime. But in the summertime, we'd slow down and it would balance itself out. So like I said, I worked for the piers about 6 months. Then I decided to quit. Now, in 1989, just to give a little bit more of a recap, I had a bad car accident. And in this car accident, I thought I was going to die. It was a head-on collision. And I cried out to God and I asked God to spare my life that night. And when my car got hit, when the impact happened, I got out of the accident basically unharmed. Okay. A year had gone by now. It's 1990. And I came home from work one day and I'm watching TV. I still lived at home. I'm getting ready to wait to eat dinner. Mike and my mother were in the kitchen, they're preparing dinner, whatever. I'm watching TV. And a thought about that car accident flashed through my mind. But it was weird because the thought that went through my mind actually was like a question. And the question was, do you remember the night of your car accident? You asked God to spare you that night. What have you done for God lately? And I was like, that's a strange thought because I couldn't understand why I would even think that. But to answer that question was, I did absolutely nothing for God lately. I was still drinking, I was still driving, I was still living my life the way I always lived, and I was, running par for the course. Basically, everything that, like I explained, that happened in 1989 in part three. So I thought about the question and I said, you know what? Maybe I should do something for God. Too many times we look at God or Jesus as a genie in a bottle. We go to him when we're in a foxhole, when we have a problem, and we run to him in a prayer. Then the situation works itself out. And then we put him back in the drawer and we carry on with our life until we hit our next foxhole. And I says, you know what? That's really not right either. I can't use God for when I need him. That's a fair weather friend. I call him when I need something. Then when I don't need something, I don't want to know him. I don't want to be his friend anymore. So I says to myself, you know what? I should do something. But I didn't know what to do. But I remembered in 1988 at Friendship Day at New Jerusalem Christian Church, they gave me a Bible. I had that Bible on my bookshelf. So I opened it up. And I didn't know where to start reading. So I started on page 1. Where do you start in a book? Start on page 1. I started in Genesis. And there was a lot of stories in Genesis that I never knew before. Like I knew the story about Noah's Ark, obviously, Adam and Eve, certain things like that. But there was a story about this guy named Joseph. And it was so intriguing how his brothers plotted to kill him. Instead of killing him, they sold him into Egypt as a slave. As a slave in Egypt, they told his father that he was dead, that he was mauled by an animal. So the father's mourning his son, thinking he's dead. Meanwhile, he's a slave in Egypt. Talk about deception and treachery. You would never imagine the treachery that's recorded in the lives of the Bible, because people are people. So anyway, Joseph, what intrigued me about him was, despite everything that happened to him, he never lost his composure. He's working as a slave for a guy whose wife starts to seduce him, and he resists the temptation. She actually accuses him of trying to rape her, and he ends up going into a dungeon for about 2 or 3 years for a crime he didn't commit. Now, what intrigued me about this was, in a roundabout way, minus the going to the dungeon part, one area that I always struggled with in my 20s, especially as a man, was sexual immorality, lust. Okay, I had a lustful eye when it came to women, and I actually once found myself in an identical situation. I'm ashamed to say it's not something I'm proud of, but I once found myself in a situation with a woman that was married, that she was in a broken marriage. Their marriage was on the verge of breaking up, from what I was told, from what she said to me. And she did come on to me a little bit. And let's just say I wasn't as successful as Joseph was in resisting temptation. That's one of the reasons why I admire this guy so much, because he was able to do something that I know I wasn't able to do. And if you could do something that I can't do, and if you have that integrity, I respect that. So I began reading the Bible, and it took me about 8 months. But eventually, after 8 months, I worked my way all the way to Revelation. Lot of things I skipped. The book of Numbers was confusing. I skipped half the Psalms. Obviously, I had no idea what was going on in Revelation. One of the most confusing books in the Bible at the time for me. But I'm making an effort. I'm saying, you know what, God, I'm going to try to do something for you. Because let's face it, I'm living my life. I haven't changed a bit. So while this was going on, my Aunt Carol and my Uncle Dominic once again invited me to New Jerusalem Christian Church, and I decided to go. Now I'm reading the Bible. I got a lot of questions. So I says, let me go to church and maybe get some of these questions answered. And I filled out a friendship card, whatever, like a first time visitor card. So a couple of weeks later, two people came from the church to my house visiting me. I remember my mom thought that they were Jehovah's Witnesses at the door. But they asked for me by name. They said they were from New Jerusalem. They had an apple pie with them. My mom invited them in. I was getting ready to go out that night. So I saw the apple pie. My mom's making coffee. Mike's sitting at the table. I says, you know what? Forget about going out. I'm going to have coffee and cake. So I sat down and I started asking them about these questions. I told them about how I read the Bible and all these things, that I had some questions. And they told me about a Bible study that the church offered. And I went to this Bible study. It was every Wednesday night. And I was surprised to see that there was a lot of people there my own age. And, in their early 20s, mid 20s. And it was very different than what I expected. And people were very welcoming. They didn't know me. I didn't know anyone there. But they all welcomed me. Hi, how are you? And there's guys there, there's girls there. So there was a couple that was engaged. And congratulations. And you would have thought within 2 weeks, you would have thought I knew these people for 2 years. That's how welcoming it was, and I started to enjoy it because I was getting my answers to my questions. So this lasted for about maybe 2, 3, or 4 months at the most. And then I said to myself, who am I kidding? I'm not ready to be a born again Christian. I'm not ready to, I knew that the Bible talked about premarital sex and that it's a sin and all these things. And I wasn't ready to even go down that road. So I says, God, listen, I'm not ready for this yet. But please protect me and watch over me because there may be a day when I am ready. But I'm sorry to say, God, that day's not today. So while this was going on, in 1992, a couple of years went by. Mike and my mom got married. He retired from being a longshoreman. They went to Italy on their honeymoon. And I can't say nothing bad about the guy, like I said. He made my mother always had a dream of going to Italy and seeing where her parents were born and meeting her cousins in Italy that she never met before. And Mike literally made her dreams come to pass, okay? And I respected him for that. And I just had this thing about me where I says I can't allow myself to get close to anyone because then I get vulnerable. And then I'm going to end up getting hurt again. I'm going to, the person's going to be here and gone tomorrow, whatever the case may be. And I was like, I can't allow that to keep happening to me. And like I said, it affected my relationships. I would go out and date, girls that I would meet in bars, girls that, were not basically marriage material. No one that I would really want my mom to meet or to bring home to Christmas dinner. I would just date around and fool around, and I like my independence. Okay. And to me, that was, my lot. I never believed that I would one day ever get married. I didn't think anything eternal, lifelong would come my way. And that's why it affected my relationship with Mike. That Mike thought I didn't like him, or he thought that maybe I didn't accept him marry my mother. And that was the farthest thing from the truth. And I always said, I want to talk to him one day, have a heart to heart talk to him one day. But I also had a lot of pride. And as a guy, to go over to another guy and sit down and put my heart on my sleeve like that wasn't going to be an easy thing to do. So I kept kicking that can down the road. So what happened now in 1993 was my mom's getting ready to retire from her job, and her and Mike are planning on enjoying their retirement years, going on vacations and enjoying their life, which they're entitled to, which they should do. But at this point, I started to think, well, maybe Mike is going to stay around for a while. And I started lowering my walls a little bit. I started opening up a little bit more to him. And in 1993, he was diagnosed with cancer. And within a few months of being diagnosed, Mike passed. My mother instantly found herself a widow. And now it was just me and my mom against the world again. We were living in New Jersey. I was no longer working for the plumbing shop in Brooklyn. I got a job with a courier service, an overnight express company, which I'll talk more about in the next episode. But so I'm working in Jersey now, and it's just me and my mom. We had a house in Jersey, and it was like, okay, now we got to start all over again. To make matters even more challenging, I get a phone call in 1993 from my father's sister, my Aunt Ro. That's what I used to call her, my Aunt Ro. It's called by short for her name. And her husband, they lived in Rockville Center, Long Island. I would spend my summers at their house. They had a big house in Long Island. I would go on my uncle's boat. And basically, when I used to go to their house, I thought I was at a resort. From a two-bedroom, four-room apartment in Brooklyn to this big house in Long Island. I used to think their house was a mansion. But anyway, she called me up and she tells me that my father, who was now remarried in North Carolina, was diagnosed with kidney disease. Years of polluting his body with alcohol, toxins of alcoholism, polluted his kidneys. He was now taking dialysis. He was going on a waiting list for a new kidney. And she wanted to know if I would want to call him. I wrote my father off when I was 12. I had not spoken to him now in over 10 years. I'm going to call him out of the blue and just say, yeah, hi, Dad, what's up? He's going to know I'm only calling him because I heard what happened. He's going to know it's not sincere. And one thing about me was I was very genuine. I keep it real. I tried my best not to be a phony. I tried to put it out there and call a spade a spade. And I wasn't going to be hypocritical with this. So I told my aunt to be polite. I said, I'll think about it. Now, I was still occasionally reading my Bible. And in the Gospel of Mark, there was a verse that said, in Mark 11:26, chapter 11, verse 26, it said that if you do not forgive people when they sin against you, God won't forgive you when you sin against him. And I was still living my life. I was sinning against God every day. And I was still doing my thing, like I said. I never really changed. But then, I thought about that thought that once went through my mind a couple of years earlier. What have you done for God lately? God spared your life that night. So I started to wrestle with myself. And I says, okay, God, you know what? You know the way my father is better than I do. I'm going to call this guy up out of the blue. He's going to hang up on me. And once he hangs up on me, my hands are clean. At that point, God, you can't say that you're not going to forgive me my sins because I don't forgive him, because he's got to forgive me in order for me to forgive him. It's got to be mutual. So if he doesn't want no part of me, my hands are clean. I'm already projecting what's going to happen as if I already know what God's planning. But if God's working something out in your life, he's not going to set you up for failure. God already had a plan here. God was already working on my father's heart, okay, and to forgive me, okay? I just didn't want to forgive him. I was the problem. So I called my aunt. I got his phone number, and I called him out of the blue. He's living in North Carolina, remarried. He answers the phone. I says, hey, Dad, which sounded so weird for me to say. I said, it's me, Johnny. Johnny, my son Johnny. I says, yeah, you want to hang up? He says, no, I don't want to hang up. I said, what do you mean you don't want to hang up? You're supposed to hang up. I'm saying that to myself. And now I'm stuck on the phone talking to him. He didn't hang up on me. Now what do? I wasn't planned for this. He goes, so the prodigal son has returned. And I found it funny that he used a biblical reference. I asked him again. I said, yeah, do you want to hang up? I asked him again. He said again, no, I don't want to hang up. And now I'm stuck on the phone. I didn't realize it because I didn't know about the 12 steps at the time. But I was actually working my 8th and 9th step as far as my father was concerned, making amends. Which is why I say the 12 steps are biblical, which we'll talk more about in upcoming episodes when I talk about freedom ministry. So anyway, we spoke for about 2 hours that night. I can't even tell you what my phone bill was. Back then, that was a long distance call from New Jersey to North Carolina. But we spoke for 2 hours. And when we hung up the phone, we weren't father and son, but we formed a foundation to make amends. Okay? We agreed to have a fresh start with each other. I told him I was in the Teamsters Union now, working for an express company. Had a good job, and which I said, like I said, I'm going to talk more about this company and what and this job that I had in Jersey in the next episode. But I think that basically sums up a good amount of stuff for today, as far as what have you done for me lately, and it's about not always asking God to do for you, but it should be mutual. What do we do for God? Or is God our genie? Our wish is God's command? No, it's God's wish is our command. That's the way we have a relationship with Jesus Christ. So tune in to part 5, which is 1994. The transformation begins. Thank you for tuning in.